Good morning, everyone, and welcome to, let's see here. There we go. Needed to set up something for our captioner, which again, a couple of announcements before we get started here. Many of you will remember these announcements if you've been to a number of our webinars in the past. For those of you new, welcome. We're going to have a wonderful session today. Dr. Murkison from Southern University is going to be talking about employer perceptions of hiring persons with disabilities. It's actually a pretty fascinating presentation, so please stay with us through that entire presentation. A couple of items. For those of you that are interested in CRC credits, and you might be familiar with that, um, uh, and how we have done this over almost 2 years now, you will get an email, in this case, probably Thursday, that's our evaluation form for the webinar. Please complete that. And at the end of the evaluation form, there will be a place for you to put your name and your email address, and that will get you the CRC credit. And Jen Gunlock Klott, who is one of my colleagues at SVRI, as well as Heidi Decker-Maurer, who you will actually see as part of the recorded presentation and possibly some follow-up. Um, we will get that information to you. And Jen is posting a variety of things in our chat. She'll have a link for the PowerPoint slides for the presentation today. Progressively, and probably more towards the end of today's session, she'll be putting a link that'll explain again about CRC. We'll talk about that again at the end. As I started to say, if you would like to look at the captions on your menu bar, mine's on the bottom of my screen, yours might be on the top. You'll see a box, well, it says closed caption and CC. If you click on that, you'll be able to see the captions themselves. If you have questions around tech or logging in, maybe you're losing sound, those types of things, if you could put those in chat, that would be great. Jen will do what she can to help you sort that out. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. The presentation itself is about 50 minutes, give or take, and then we'll talk after that. So thanks again.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Clarence Murkison. I am an assistant professor at Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I teach in the Rehabilitation and Disability Studies Department. I'd like to thank Project E3 for giving me the opportunity to speak with you guys today. I'll be talking to you about employer perceptions toward hiring people with disabilities. This is research that I conducted, and I wanted to share it with you in hopes that it'll help us all be more effective practitioners and addressing issues relating to people with disabilities. So a little bit of background about the study and why I felt it was even important to address this issue is looking at the issues of work and work roles. We know that that's important to everyone, in particular folks with disabilities that are trying to get back into the world of work. But when we're talking about the meaning of work, having a mission in life and being affirmed in life by others is highly valuable in our society. Work is important to us. Work roles provide us opportunities to experience being a part of society, being a useful member of society, being appreciated for what we do. Many people with disabilities that are either taken out or left out of the workforce experience sadness and grief over not having that piece of their life available to them anymore. So having that professional identity taken away from us can have some mental health aspects as well. There's also a feeling that some of their value as a human is being lost. Again, this all points to the importance of work in our society. This will be especially the case with someone who has acquired a disability later in life. I mean, think about us, think about you all and the work that you do and how closely a lot of times that's related to our own identity and sense of self. Work roles are important because they provide social contact. For some folks, that can mean having social contact and an avenue for getting back into society. A socially isolated life may result in feelings of diminished human dignity and a less meaningful life situation altogether. These factors in turn can lead to a greater focus on health problems. So the long lasting impacts of not being employed or not having that work role in their lives can affect folks with disabilities in several different ways. The ability to maintain an organized time structure is often taken away when somebody with a disability is not allowed back into the workforce. Work is an important part of daily life structure, and without a work role, it's difficult to maintain a functional life pattern. Missing work or not being allowed to work changes your ordinary habits. So, whereas you may be able to say, hey, at this time of the day, I'm going to do this activity, or there's this meeting at this time of the day. When you don't have that work role, your whole day is just, for some people, they might describe it as feeling like an open space and just not having that routine that makes life a little bit more, orderly and manageable for them. Unlike individuals who may become the targets of job discrimination, people with disabilities have an obstacle embedded in the very language that describes them. The term disability has a different meaning in at least three different contexts. In the workers' compensation program, disability refers to the damages that one person collects from another as a result of injury. In the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, disability refers to a condition that links poor health and unemployment. In the context of civil rights laws, disability is linked to discrimination. Furthermore, since disability is commonly associated with disability benefits, which typically means that the person is unable to work, employment for folks with disabilities can appear to be a contradiction. So there's been research out there that says that folks are less likely to hire somebody that is involved in any of those programs just because, like I said, it's kind of contradictory to think that someone with a disability wants to actually work. Again, research supports that. So when we're talking about the perception of disability as it relates to reasonable accommodations versus excuses, employers often think that reasonable accommodations are excuses. So as practitioners, it's important for us to let folks know that that is not the case. The perception of disability becomes a major factor instead of how effective or ineffective a worker tends to be as an employee. They're only caught up on what kind of problems or issues that are going to be brought to the table. People with disabilities are still seen as different, and therefore they're stigmatized simply because they either ask for an accommodation or because they obviously have a disability. To many employers, the least risky person seems motivated to develop the necessary job skills is the best potential employee. A sense of risk underlies every aspect of hiring a person with disability. Decisions are usually based on risk reduction more so than performance enhancement. So while they're recruiting, selecting, training, accommodating, or promoting, folks that were involved in the Stensrud study feel like the risk that people brought to the table by having a disability outweighed, just taking a chance on somebody with a disability. Again, risk reduction was the key. So those risks could be direct through increased costs that result in inappropriate hires or increased medical insurance to cover the folks with disabilities. The risk could be indirect through the satisfaction of workers with the performance or accommodations received by coworkers that have a disability. Recruiting and selecting the wrong person could cost recruiters and HR personnel their bonuses or jobs if they get it wrong. Keeping non-productive workers could cost supervisors their jobs or even result in an entire unit being closed. So providing training or accommodations to workers who have disabilities may result in less teamwork or other workers having a um, perceiving that they are receiving unfair advantages because they're getting these accommodations. So again, it's about us educating those employers, teaching the folks with disabilities how to advocate for themselves to show that that's not necessarily the case. Um, to address some of these, issues that were raised in this study. And then there's also, I don't want to like skim past that last bullet, but The conceptualization of people with disabilities included those who created problems for the organization because they asked for accommodations and did their job, or obviously had a disability and were exemplars of hard work. So these employers are saying, hey, folks that ask for accommodations, they're usually ones that are going to cause us some problems down the road. Again, these are the issues that we're up against in trying to get folks with disabilities back to work. The perception of co-workers, if advancement or accommodations were given in any manner, co-workers would be concerned about the fairness of promotion. Negative perceptions of an individual with disability suggests to employers that an applicant brings too much risk to a job and that they should be avoided. Again, they're focused on that least risky applicant. So those risks bringing as a potential employee are considered more so than a person's potential. So all of those things being considered, the work roles, the stigma that folks with disabilities are facing, the perceptions that these hiring managers have about folks with disabilities, all contribute to the need for the study. Folks with disabilities often experience employment opportunities, challenged lifestyles, fluctuating health status, subpar pay rates, right? Underemployment. We talked about the mental health, the potential impact from a mental health standpoint for these folks with disabilities if they're not allowed to get back into the workforce. Poverty, we know the rates of poverty among folks with disabilities. We know that it exceeds that of the general population. So again, giving them an opportunity to get back into work and figuring out why or what are the barriers is another importance for this study as well. Diversity, diversity of the American workforce suffers when the disability community is not represented. We're in an age where we're talking about acceptance and having access to everyone in society. Folks with disability are a part of that process too. Making sure that people see somebody that looks like them, maybe a kid with a disability. If they can see somebody working in a particular profession, it can motivate them or give them the sense that, hey, I can do that too, right? And then productivity. I think a lot is focused on the risk and the costs that are associated with folks with disabilities. But I think there also has to be a focus on what folks with disabilities bring to the table and what their level of productivity is, how motivated they are to work. So with the research, I want to focus more on the content and what that means for us as professionals, more so than the technical information. But I did include the research study in that information. But the research problem that I was addressing is the stigma and discrimination. Is that stigma and discrimination continues to be exist in the workforce toward both hiring and working with folks with disabilities? So my focus was on a lack of information related to a manager's perception toward hiring and working with folks with disabilities. So seeing where that reluctance to hire folks was at. So some of the research questions that I looked at is what are the demographic characteristics of those managers who are making the decisions and making recommendations about whether or not to hire folks with disabilities? What are the types of employing organizations for those people that are participating in the study? To what extent do managers have a favorable or very favorable perception of hiring somebody with a disability? And what extent is there a correlation between social desirability and employer perceptions? What do managers report as their greatest challenges in hiring and working with folks with disabilities? And what do these same hiring managers report as being their greatest benefits in hiring and working with folks with disabilities? The hypothesis that there would be no statistically significant difference in the mean score on the employer perceptions toward hiring people with disabilities scale, and that there was no statistically significant correlation between social desirability and perceptions. So where did this data come from? This was taken from a sample of folks in the Auburn Opelika area. These folks were found through the Chamber of Commerce, and we went this route and looking at folks who were more likely to be the decision makers and in charge of making those decisions about who would be hired for these different positions. So these would be business owners, HR managers, folks that would typically be listed in the Chamber of Commerce. So what did we use for the study? The employer perceptions toward hiring people with disabilities scale, the validity of that scale, the validity of the employer perception toward hiring individuals with disabilities survey for this study was established by a panel of experts. Instrument reliability was established using Crumbaugh's alpha. How did we collect the data? I got the information using the email addresses that were listed in that Chamber of Commerce website. So basically, there was a survey sent out to all of these folks that we thought would be, good folks to participate in the study on Qualtrics, and we got them to respond. Obviously, we kept their information safe and secure, and we used that in addressing the research questions. So, what were the results? For question one, total number of managers participating in the study was only 29, right? But 41% of those were in the 56 to 65 age range, right? So the majority of the managers in this sample were female and white. Highest level of education completed by the majority of the sample was a bachelor's degree, and the majority of the sample did not have a disability. Further, hiring managers who had more than 20 years of experience comprised most of the sample, and most of the sample had hired a person with a disability. And most of the sample has worked with a person with a disability, and about a third of the sample described the type of organization, business, agency that they work for as other. So looking at question two, 10 of the respondents did not classify the type of work, organization, business, or agency that they worked for. However, 8 worked for the service industry, while only 1 was in manufacturing. Looking at research question 3, there was a statistically significant difference in hiring manager perceptions toward hiring folks with disabilities based on their collective scores for the scale that we were using to measure that. Employer responses toward hiring folks with disabilities were less than positive. There was no statistically significant correlation between the social desirability and perception. So folks were found to be answering appropriately, and not just because they thought we wanted them to say one thing versus the other. For the research questions 5 and 6, those common themes for greatest challenges were communication difficulties, perceptions and assumptions made regarding the person with a disability, whether that person would be accepted by coworkers, and concerns about whether the person with a disability would be able to keep pace with job demands. The common things for greatest benefits were an increase in diversity, new perspectives being brought to the job, learning to be patient and compassionate toward persons with a disability, and realizing that people with disability can be dedicated, hard workers. So the significance of this work was that by specifically examining employer perceptions, rehabilitation counselors will better be able to understand the process by which businesses recruit for their workers. So if we know the thought process they're going through and some of the issues that they have in hiring folks with disabilities, we can be better equipped to address those concerns and raise those employment rates. So there was also being able to highlight that employers who have previous experience with employees with disabilities are typically satisfied with the experience, but they may still be hesitant to hire folks with disabilities. There's a need for refocused job development strategies and disability employment advocacy. So job development needs a stronger focus on the context of employers' enterprises and organizational processes. So putting people with disabilities to work the lower cost of disabilities. The emotional and social benefits of working may be much more impactful than the economic benefits. Again, several layers relating to an impact in its issues. So the implications of that study, the assumption can be made that in general, respondents held less than positive views toward hiring people with disability, as indicated by their responses of less than less than agree, strongly agree on the survey items. There's also the implication that since none of the respondents had a disability, they may not have been aware of the contributions that a person with a disability can make in a workplace. This speaks to the broader focus of the study. Hiring managers could benefit from special staff meetings and or seminars to become aware of people with disabilities and their related employment issues. So again, a lot of it is just about knowledge and being educated about these issues and how you're getting a great employee. Um, it doesn't matter if they have a disability or not. They can still be great employees and bring a lot to the table. Previous research shows that people with disabilities are typically unemployed or underemployed, meaning that if companies that participated in this study hired a person with a disability, they may be highly unlikely to hold a position in which they would be in charge of hiring decisions. Furthermore, the results of the study imply that efforts to minimize employment discrimination continue to fall short, even with the education and media attention that's focused on inclusivity and folks with disabilities, which includes acceptance and value of diversity. All right, so this research is saying even though that there's been a focus on that, these numbers at least suggest that we're still falling short in those areas. And then there's the importance of contact. There's also research out there that shows that the more likely somebody is to have meaningful interaction and contact with a person with a disability, the more likely they are to hold a less stigmatizing attitude toward that person with a disability. We talked about how coworkers might feel like a person with a disability is getting an unfair advantage if they have an accommodation. Again, that would go back to educating them. And contact in that situation would help too, because if you have an employee that has worked side by somebody with disability, and they know that that accommodation just puts them, just give them an equal opportunity to do the same work that they're doing, and they'll see how much of a hard worker that they are. So, job seekers with a disability can preempt and counter employer judgment by using self advocacy statements and a well constructed resume. So, again, um, this task falls on us as the ones that are working with folks with disabilities, but also the person with a disability to, cut those issues off before they even have an issue to manifest. Like, hey, let me show you how professional I am. Let me show you how good of a worker that I've been in the past. Look at this resume. Look at these references. Look at how I'm presenting myself. I can be the employee that you need. Many employers are unaware of the positive statistics regarding folks with disabilities, work ethic, and productiveness, and how that contributes to a company's productivity and profitability, which is usually the areas that these hiring managers are focused on, right? So if we can arm ourselves, even if we had like a little cheat sheet that had some of these numbers on it, that's a way of being preemptive and cutting these issues off before they even work against you in an interview. Hey, look at this. This research shows that, folks with disability have been rated as, just as effective or more effective than, their counterparts without a disability, right? Show research and information on how folks with disabilities have been more productive and how they contribute to the company's overall bottom line. Providing such information, again, can improve employment for folks with disabilities. So, training initiatives to educate employers about work-related issues, rights, accommodations, etc. Person with disability could help to reduce employer liability concerns. So, if we could have the opportunity to even, you know, train the maybe the HR managers or representatives from these companies and whatever we're working in to show them how these things are working for them instead of against them, right? Reducing those liability concerns. Even if we could, um, I don't know, a seminar would be nice, but at the very least, being able to provide them with some handy information about that, I think would work in their favor also. Employers should also be informed that reasonable accommodations are intended to ensure that people with disabilities have employment rights that are equal, not superior to people without disabilities. As we spoke about before, these are just allowing folks with disabilities to be on equal par as their coworkers. So again, educating the employees, educating the employers, All of those things will reduce some of those negative perceptions about accommodations. Studies similar to this one may be useful in creating and maintaining a more positive perception toward hiring people with disabilities. There are additional opportunities for research that include addressing what is taught in colleges and university courses and programs when it comes to hiring and working with a person with a disability. This would especially be useful for human resources and business management programs. So if we can get to these folks that are going to be, running these agencies and be in a position to control who gets access to employment and working with certain companies, that can be a way to kind of cut off these, stigmatizing ideas before they get out into the world of work. If we can make this a part of their education program, then it will be embedded in their head that, hey, hiring a person with a disability is not going to be a disadvantage. These are all of the things that I learned in my college program about how hiring somebody with a disability can be effective for my agency. These educational programs can include training aimed at reducing stigmatizing attitudes, possibly providing personal contact with a person with disabilities. Again, we talked about how that contact is important. So maybe even if you brought in somebody with an upper management position that happens to have a disability, or someone from HR that could talk about an experience that they've had with hiring people with disabilities. All of those things that go toward educating the next generation of hiring managers and managers that are going to be those gatekeepers in allowing folks with disabilities to re-enter or enter into the world of work. Such educational interventions can even extend to high school curriculums, right? To emphasize accurate information about disabilities and people with disabilities to prevent the stigma before it develops. That's a very critical age in how we think about other people and how we fit into society. And, everybody's place in society is trying to be figured out in, junior high, high school. So if we could take it there and educate those kids before they even develop those attitudes, that could go a long way in the future as well. As higher education continues to be more diverse, future studies using new graduates of human resources and business management programs might reveal a change in the hiring managers' attitudes toward folks with disabilities. So, if we apply all of these things that we've just talked about in these last few slides, maybe we will see these numbers start to change in studies like this. The focus of this study may be useful to policymakers and higher education institutions and business practices as they work to improve perceptions toward hiring folks with disabilities. Right, so this is just a list of references that I used for this study and this presentation today. And I believe this information will be made available to you guys as well. So now we can move more into a question and answer period, and see if you guys have any thoughts or questions about the information that I presented today. But again, I want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to present this research to you and this information. Hopefully it serves as some food for thought that you can go and apply in the community so we can continue working on these employment rates. Thank you.
Do you have experience or advice for VR counselors who may be working with a person who is in a professional position or, um, a higher social position, um, like an attorney or a doctor or somebody with advanced degrees who maybe is dealing with a disability themselves?
Well, I could say that if you're working with somebody in that position, um, it's going to be difficult if you have those gatekeepers that say that, hey, if you have this, you can't do that. But if you don't have that, you can still be just as successful, obviously, as you have been, like since you've had this condition. For a lot of folks, they've had these conditions and they've dealt with them for years, and they've able to be successful and move forward with that. I would encourage you guys, if you're working with someone that's in that position, if they are, private practice or, someone that's in a position that they can look towards someone with a disability and maybe give them some of the same opportunities that they've been given. I would encourage that to be the case also. It's kind of like an each one, reach one kind of a thing. So That is a way that somebody in that position can address some of those issues by just reaching out to other professionals that may have a disability that, you know, it says that, hey, well, because you can't do this, you might be limited in this profession, but look at all of these other great things you can do. Folks with disabilities can have, great attitudes. They can be very energetic. They could easily fit into a marketing system, right? Where they go out and continue to help that person build their business. A lot of it is just thinking outside of the box and how
Mhm.
you can use the skills that this person is bringing to the table rather than looking at how what this person can't do is limiting their potential in other areas. So I would say just be creative. If you have somebody that is successful, talk to them about how they got to that point. What helped them? How did they get around the issue of having a disability but still being, successful in the role that they're in? And just use each other for information's sake. It would be great if there was some sort of a network that could be established in the community where folks with disabilities could all kind of share their experiences, almost like a 12-step group, right? You have the folks that have been sober for years and they're reaching back and helping out the folks that may have
Mhm.
only been sober for a week or so. So if there was a platform or a way that information could be shared among folks with disabilities or even with the provider so they can take that information back to the folks with disabilities. Just that sense of community. I think it's all about education and exposure. So whatever
Mhm.
way you can get that to help out folks with disabilities, I think it's going to be useful moving forward and addressing some of these pretty bad issues that we're seeing. These numbers with the mental health, the poverty lines, the economic impacts, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's interesting that you should bring that up. It leads to another question. Um, People need to be creative when they're thinking about adapting to maybe a new work headspace. Somebody who has always dreamed of being a whatever, and
Mhm.
then the disability that is acquired or happens. Sometimes I think it's really hard for people to change their frame of mind and, think beyond, I've always wanted to be an X,
Mhm.
and be able to think of some of the peripheral things that they could possibly do. Um, you spoke earlier um, about mental health issues sometimes when it comes to going from having worked to having a disability and then into that adaptation. Could you speak a little bit more about some of those mental health issues for people? It seems like there is some grieving and some loss involved, and I wonder if you have some ideas about that that you'd like to share.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. When we talk about the mental health impact, again, if we're thinking about how closely our identity is related to what we do for a living, and it's all of a sudden have that taken away, it would send you through some grieving stages, right? So some of the same issues that a person may have had when they first realize they have a disability and going through those stages of grief. Well, if you're able to move past that and realize, okay, so this is my level of functioning, this is how I'm going to be able to survive moving forward. And then you get back and start thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to make a living? It could send you right back into going through those stages of grief all over again.
Hmm.
And we know that that puts you at risk of anxiety issues, depression issues, right? Those things put you at risk of some self medicating, right? Bad coping skills, addiction, suicide, all of those things are closely related when you're isolated, when you feel like you have no options, when you feel like you're hopeless, when you feel like you're not a valued member of society. So um, being aware of that, paying attention to the mental health focus and the importance of paying attention to mental health for folks with disabilities oftentimes get overlooked. A lot of times we see the person with a disability and we just feel like, hey, the disability is what's going on with them. We don't think that,
Hmm.
hey, this person with a disability could be dealing with depression, anxiety, trauma, right? Whatever the case may be. And these things in turn would develop their productivity and ability to get hired at a job. And it would, again, if we're talking about giving a person with a disability an opportunity, if we haven't paid attention to that person's mental health, you give them the job and then their depression or anxiety flares up, because maybe they get put in a situation where a coworker is saying, "Oh, well, it's not fair that you get this." So
Yeah.
then those issues come up, and then you send them right back spiraling down into a bad place. So then that goes back to that contact that we talked about. That can work both ways.
Hmm.
It can be good or bad. If you have a
Right.
bad experience with somebody with a disability and they can handle, the pressure or the stress of dealing with those things in a job, now that employer is saying, hey, you know what? The next time I see a person that's got a disability, I'm going to be a little bit more hesitant about hiring that person, right? So that's
Right.
why paying attention to the whole person, that mental health aspect, the wellness, all of those things are important when you're dealing with folks with disabilities in addressing these employment issues too. It's funny how all of those things are connected,
Hmm.
but they
Yeah.
really are.
Yeah. They seem um, interconnected and kind of sometimes cyclical, even as with poverty and disability. People who are in poverty have a harder time being able to get their health care, and so that can exacerbate a disability. Um, that really it makes a lot of sense too with people having their job tied to their identity. Um, a lot of folks, I'm sure everybody who has worked in the history of work has thought, I don't want to work. But I don't think that people realize how disorienting it can be for people to not have work and not, you know, having a job sometimes is how people get their self-respect or the thing that they most feel proud of. So I think that you've made some excellent points about that. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the qualities that often people with disabilities can bring to the workplace that maybe somebody who is able might not be able to bring?
Yeah, yeah. Some of those qualities would, definitely be work ethic. You've had somebody that's had a disability to deal with, whether it be their whole life or now, just to be able to push themselves through maybe the rehabilitation process, or to push forward despite maybe having some negative experiences, maybe in childhood with teasing, or realizing maybe there were certain games that they weren't able to play. Right?
Mm.
Not saying, okay, well, I'm not going to play this game, but they're going to figure out how they can still do it. So that's usually what you get from folks with disability: that
Right.
tenacity, that work ethic, that, thinking outside the box. Hey, I'm
Hmm.
going to find a way to get this done. I find a way to get things done with my disability. I'm going to find a way to get this job done. Right. So I think that's why you see those numbers about productivity and profitability for companies that actually hire folks with disabilities, is because they have that energy, that desire. A lot of times, if doors have been shut over and over again, to have an opportunity to be substantially employed versus underemployed just makes them want to get in there and prove themselves even more. So, whereas somebody else is like, oh, okay, well, this is not a big deal. I'll find
Hmm.
a job. A person with a disability knows that these, you know, jobs of substance are a little harder to find. So they're
Right.
going to do what it takes to really stay there and be productive and help out in whatever way they can.
Do you have any thoughts about with coworkers? I know you mentioned maybe going to seminars or doing a little bit of extra learning
Mhm.
about how to be a good coworker to a person with a disability. Do you know of any sources that would be good for um, VR practitioners to recommend to people who are hiring people with disabilities so that the coworkers can get comfortable with um, and be able to interact with um, with their coworkers who have disabilities and um, I think that sometimes the risk involved is just kind of a saving face risk because people don't necessarily, um, if they haven't had experiences working with people with disabilities, I think that they're sometimes worried that they're going to say the wrong thing
Yeah.
about the person with a disability. And there's been a lot of really good work done on person first language. Um, but I know that in the VR field, a lot of the times we know about that, but I don't know that that is information that's spread to people who may have a coworker with a disability or a hiring manager who may be looking at hiring with a person with disabilities. Do you know of any sources that might be able to help either managers or potential coworkers wrap their minds around the idea and kind of feel like they know the etiquette of that?
Yeah, well, I know a lot of state agencies. I don't know, where everybody is at, but a lot of state agencies put out those kind of informative videos. A lot of time, sometimes they, try to be funny. They fall a little short, but they're still, educational. And then sometimes they're just, kind of a straight documentary or success story about what has helped, somebody with a disability be successful in the world of work. I think if you can put somebody that's concerned about having a person with a disability work next to them because they feel like they're not going to hold up their end of the bargain. I think if you can show them how that's happened in the past, like how it's been successful and what people have been able to do, I think that can go a long way toward managing that too. You never know what somebody's been exposed to. That person with
Right.
that doesn't have a disability, there may be someone in his family that he's had some experience with, and
Hmm.
maybe their level of functioning is completely different from the person that you're bringing in, but all they know is, hey, that's a person with a disability, and they're not able to do this, that, or the other. So anytime you can show them, like, hey, you're going to get a quality employee. This is how folks with disabilities have been able to be productive in the past. Like if they can actually see it, like visually,
Hmm.
I think that would help. So maybe checking with, your local VR to see if they have something like that that would be available to employers.
Hmm.
Or, if you're out there in the field and you've got somebody that's been successful, hey, maybe asking that person if they would be willing to, do a little, video themselves so you could have that to maybe show to employers, and in turn they can show it to the people that are working on the, the lines with the person with the disability. And then I
Right.
think a lot of times it's just a matter of, okay, let me show you, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes actions speak louder than words.
Right.
So if they're actually there and they're noticing, hey, this person with a disability, man, they're keeping up with me, and maybe even outworking me, and I see that all they
Right.
have is this brace that helps them with their back support, right?
Hmm.
How could
Right.
that make them be so productive with all of this stuff? It's just a brace, right? So then they
Hmm.
realize, okay, well, that's not something to give them some sort of a superpower. So then they
Hmm.
realize, hey, this person with a disability, they can hold their own, they can do this job. And again, like you said, it's kind of cyclical that the next
Hmm.
time somebody comes in, they've maybe told another coworker about how good this person with a disability was. So that's changing the attitude for the next person with a disability that comes in.
Hmm. Yeah, one of my colleagues that I've worked with before um, has talked about kind of pulling people up behind you. If
Hmm.
he's a person with a disability and he loves to mentor people because you know, he's learned a lot in his life and he likes to share that wisdom and use it in a way that helps people who are coming up to be able to like you said, see that example. And it seems sometimes that people have preconceived notions about what folks with disabilities can do.
Hmm.
Um, but usually, after somebody has met somebody who has a disability, or somebody that they kind of don't understand where the person is coming from, once they meet somebody or see that demonstration, like you said, it kind of helps to break up some of those preconceived notions of
Right.
folks and what they're able to do. You were talking kind of about a group like an AA group or some sort of group where people with disabilities can support one another. I know that with some of the transition aged youth who are being included now in job training, there are job clubs, um, and it seems like that really is helpful for people. Um, it sounds like it's something that would be helpful for people who have disabilities and also who don't. But um, is that something that you've seen in your experience as something that's worked for people? Um, what are the benefits of that? Do you feel like it really helps helps people get ready to either go back into work or find a network of people who might be able to help them um, find some job opportunities.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually think both of those are at play. You can share information about how to find the jobs that are out there, and maybe the employers that have been more focused on inclusivity and accessibility. So you can share that information. Then there's also the aspect of, in group counseling, we kind of talk about the installation of hope, right? If you can
Hmm.
see someone else that has been successful in going where you're trying to go, that can make you feel like, okay, hey, I
Yeah.
can do that too. So again, just being in that group with folks that are in a similar situation with a disability, seeing what this person has been able to do, even if the disabilities are different, you can see,
Hmm.
hey, okay, well, this person has this history and they've been able to be successful by trying this option, right?
Hmm.
Well, maybe their disability is a little different than mine, but this may be something that I could try to get the job that I want to get, right? So
Hmm.
just anywhere that you can have people that are successful in what they do, sharing stories and, giving folks the opportunity to hear things that they've done to be successful. I think it's all going to be effective and beneficial in improving those employment numbers. There could even be folks that might share, resume templates, right? Maybe
Hmm.
somebody that just had a disability, maybe they don't know how to create a resume that looks professional enough to maybe get them a job that's, uh, more of a professional position as opposed to maybe underemployment or
Right.
some subpar job that they may be working, right? So
Hmm.
if somebody could share that information, like, hey, this is a resume that I use, or this is how I develop my resume, or hey, if you go to this job center, they'll help you with that. Just any place that you can share that information with each other,
Hmm.
uh, it's going to be beneficial. Any education that can be provided, whether it's to the employer, the person with a disability, education is key. Knowing how to address these issues are going to really help them be more prepared to be successful and move around those obstacles.
Very good. Um, could you talk a little bit more about asking for requesting accommodations? I really liked your point about getting ahead of that and making sure that an employer has some information about how to do it, or the person with a disability um, can present some information or articles on hiring people with disabilities being a really good advantage. Um, so for the person with the disability or a VR counselor trying to help them, um, do you have uh, do you have a little bit more information, or can you talk a little bit more about how people would do self-advocacy, or how VR practitioners can help um, their clients do self-advocacy?
Yeah. So one is kind of a requirement, right? So you kind of, you want to be delicate with how you ask, but they're really not supposed to tell you no if you're asking for something simple that
Hmm.
goes along with your job performance or the requirements of your job.
Hmm.
So one could just be kind of letting them know that you have this issue and you feel like this accommodation would help you to do that. I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it's some small amount that the average accommodation costs, right? So
Right. I think I heard $800 is the
right,
average for
right,
the cost of an accommodation, and it seems like there's more value add for the employer. They get a lot more. They get a good return on that $800 investment or whatever it is,
yeah,
whatever that cost is. But
yeah.
yeah, and
Not something that's going to put them out of business, right?
no,
That that's the way the law is set up. It's not
right.
going to be that substantial for them.
Have you seen more instances of people with disabilities being in the position to hire people, maybe with or without disabilities? Does it seem like the number of people in a position to hire who do have disabilities is increasing at all?
I don't have specific numbers on that, but I can tell you just from talking with folks and seeing different organizations, stories that I found, and read on the internet about, disabilities and how that culture is changing. There is hope that is, something that's moving in the right direction and that can happen. Again, I think with this era of inclusivity and accepting
Hmm.
folks as they are, I think you're going to start to see more and more of that. Because the longer you have somebody with a disability that's working in these roles and these fields, they're naturally going to move up through the ranks and
Hmm.
eventually be in those positions that they can say, hey, you know what? Having a disability is not something that's going to hold somebody back. It can actually make them be more successful. So I would
Right.
like to hope and think, that is moving in the right direction.
Hmm.
That's one of the reasons that I wanted to do the research that I did.
Right.
I mentioned how the focus on that, you would think that those
Hmm.
numbers are rising. Unfortunately, in this study, it didn't show that, but this study
Right.
had a few limitations
Hmm.
geographically, number one, and
Sure.
the number of industries that
Hmm.
I was able to look at. So I would like to
Right.
think that on a broader scale, that is changing, and that is something that
Hmm.
you'll see more of in the future too.
Do you have any thoughts about that? Reaching back and getting information um, and learning about people with disability for children who aren't disabled further back in their education or earlier in their lives.
So I don't know if there's one that does it specifically relating to disabilities and trying to normalize that at an earlier age so that it's not like, oh, just a huge deal to see someone
Hmm.
with a disability or to even experience that with a disability.
Right.
But I know there's a template out there for that because there
Hmm.
are youth programs that talk about, whether we're talking about abstaining from drugs or we're talking about just practicing good behaviors, right, and
Hmm.
how to be, better citizens. So we can use
Right.
some of those same models and tweak some of that information to include acceptance of folks that look different from you, especially from
Right.
a disability standpoint. So the
Hmm.
opportunity is there. It's
Right.
just a matter of putting those things in place.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We have an absolute ton of questions to go over. Um, we have Dr. Merkerson with us today. Um, I think, let's see. Good. All right. Camera on. Technology, yay. I don't think that in the history of doing webinars, I've ever seen so many questions. So we're going to get to work on them, but there may be some that we don't get to. If that happens, we'll go ahead and we save these questions and we'll send them along to Dr. Merkerson to see if we can get an answer. Some of these are pretty related. So um, one of the one of the issues that people are asking about quite a bit in the question and answer is the information about disabilities in college curriculum for HR. I think it's something that people in special education probably uh, have just as part of the curriculum. So maybe it's already a part of um, a curriculum for students of special education that maybe could transfer over to HR students. Um, what do you think about the higher education teaching more?
Yeah, well, that was a part of what I wanted to look at in the initial study. I think I mentioned how there's been so much attention paid in society, with acceptance and that sort of thing. So originally, I wanted to do this study with HR programs, but we just had some difficulty finding a right amount to get, a large enough sample size out to.
Right.
um, which ironically that ended up being the problem with the direction that we did go. But that's something I would like to look more into and try to figure out how they are approaching disabilities. Because again, if we're trying to get to the folks in HR and the decision makers, it would just make sense if we could reach them while they're, in their program learning about how to approach those issues. I know that they talk about the ADA, but I don't know if that's just like a one lecture thing or how widespread that is embedded into their curriculum altogether, though.
Right. And if it's something that they cover, I don't know if it's something that they necessarily talk about people with. I mean, there are regulations, but I don't know if there's any information or any teaching about people.
Right.
Let's see here. I have so many questions. Um, let's see. If if a person's disability is not something that can be seen or won't typically impact their ability to do the job, is it best to disclose that they have a disability? Or is that one of those things where it really depends?
Yeah, it really does depend on the person and I guess just their philosophy on how to address that. Ideally, it shouldn't impact them. Um, but that's kind of a part of the things that we're talking about with the hiring managers. Like, have they had any kind of training on the fact that, hey, just because somebody answers yes to this question, that's just one of the things on the application is to be checked, right? It doesn't tell you anything about who that person is or what they can do.
Right.
It does kind of go back to some attribution theory type things where you are attributing, the fact that they have a disability. You kind of so if somebody has one characteristic, you kind of attribute that to the rest of them as a person. So if you're someone that sees having a disability as a limiting factor, now you're looking at the fact that they've marked that box as having a disability, meaning that I'm going to get a limited employee, right? So
Right.
that's it's hard to say. That's always a personal choice and decision. We'd like to think that it doesn't matter, but it's hard to say. It really is.
Right. One of the other kind of question streams we have in here, someone says, as a vocational counselor, I find when I reach out to employers, they are very skeptical and it is very difficult to get past that first call or contact. Do you have any suggestions on how we can approach employers?
I think if you can build some sort of relationship with them, right? I'm not saying that you are doing this, but if you can just maybe stop by and try to develop some sort of relationship with them. Marketing as simple as maybe dropping off some donuts, right? Or something simple, right? That I know everybody has budgets, but just
Hmm.
something that can get you past that initial wall or that person is going to try and close the door to your face. If you can actually get to the decision maker and show them what you have had success with doing in the past and the type of people that you have that you're trying to refer to them, I think that will go a long way. I know that's not easy, but just trying to build some sort of relationship outside of, hey, I have an employee I want you to take a look at. Even when you don't have an employee, just try and build some relationship with them. Ask them how their quarter is going. Ask them how they're handling business, right? Especially now in the middle of a COVID crisis, right?
Hmm.
Just something to try and establish a relationship so that it's not just me calling on them or trying to get them to do something when I have an employee that I'm trying to place.
Yeah, and that relationship building seems to be very well lubricated when it comes to donuts. So
Yeah,
that never hurts.
absolutely.
Um, let's see. I have a question. How do you help a client when the phobia of disclosure of a disability, when the diagnosis is not obvious, holds them back? Uh, and it seems like the person asking the question said that it can kind of lead to self-destruct behaviors for the person who's afraid to disclose their disability.
Okay. Advice for the person that's afraid to disclose a disability.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a difficult one too. It's going back to the question that you asked initially. I think if you know, so I guess the way I would look at that is, and it's may not be the most accepted way, but if you're dealing with a client that's having that much issue and having that much anxiety around disclosing whether or not they have a disability when filling out an application, then it maybe it's best for them to just go ahead and disclose it, right? At least that will take some of the angst off of them when they're sending that application in. Oh, if they call me, they're going to see that I have a disability, and then everything is going to fall apart. Well, if it helps you to kind of be a little bit more comfortable and confident when you walk into that interview. The fact that you've already disclosed that disability, then maybe that'll help you, feel a little better with where you're at. If it's just general, sadness and, issues with that employment process, that's very common. And that's more of I think more of a mental health issue than a rehabilitation issue. And, there are people that I've talked to, in the middle of this pandemic that are struggling to find work and get employment, and it's just causing depression and sadness. And those are things that need to be worked through from a mental health standpoint. That's something that they have more direct control over, as opposed to whether or not an employer is going to call them back just because they see that they, check the box or not.
Right. And sometimes it just seems like the dread is the worst part. And, like you say, just kind of popping that dread bubble and getting past it might be something, I think that might be something um, a lot of people working are going to experience, especially if they've been working from home and they have to go face to face with people again. Everybody's people skills are rusty.
Right.
Let's see. I have a question that says, what would you say to a small business owner to help them understand the positives of hiring a person with disabilities? I did come across a link. It's from the I think it's the Department of VR. The website is AskEarn, AskEarn.org, and it has a ton of really good resources for employers so that they can get all the details about that. So hopefully that helps a few of these folks who have questions on that. Let's see.
Yeah, I think just getting educated about it, like you said, look into those links, finding some resources, maybe even speaking to someone else that has been in that situation. I think the more knowledgeable folks are, just like with this exposure, right? The more
Mhm.
knowledge you have, the more educated you are about what you can expect from a person with a disability. And again, that kind of takes that anxiety down too about the process. And most of the times, I think they'll be more satisfied than not if they go ahead and make that higher.
Right. One of the questions that's popped up a few times in the question and answer um, is about industries. Are there particular industries that seem to have a harder time wrapping their minds around hiring people with disabilities? And I think that's probably another, it kind of depends question,
Mhm.
but have you seen any patterns in your research?
Yeah, I did, and unfortunately, that was one of the limitations that was a part of this study. But I told someone else that and asked the question to me directly that it's hard to pin that on
Hmm.
one particular industry. It just I hate to keep saying it, but it really does depend. I think the thing that is a little easier to recognize is that I think there's data out there that supports the fact that folks with hidden or those intellectual disabilities tend
Hmm.
to have more trouble getting, or at the very least maintaining employment than folks with the disabilities that you can see.
Hmm.
Uh, and that kind of goes back to attribution as well. Like if you can, I know that I came across a study where a person went into like a restaurant or something like that, and they had a bandage on their head, right? And they were, disruptive and
Hmm.
displaying some acting out behaviors, and people could look at them and say, "Oh, okay, well, he has a bandage on his head. There's obviously something going on with it." And then you
Hmm.
send that same person back into that same restaurant with a different group of people without the bandage. So now people are feeling like, "Oh, well, this person is just misbehaving. This person is
Hmm.
acting up. They need to get taken out of here." Right. So it's kind of the same thing that folks with intellectual disabilities experience when they're trying to get a job or maintaining a job. If they do something disruptive or something that's, I guess, kind of out of the norm, there's even more of a stigma placed on them because they look like a quote unquote normal person, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to you can see someone in a wheelchair, you can see someone with a crutch. So I think that's more the issue than trying to figure out, than knowing exactly which industry um, is more prone to being discriminatory. I'm sure there's probably some data out there about that.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Well, and in the case of some disabilities, um, uh, one of my relatives has MS, and she uses the handicap parking space because she never knows when something's going to happen. So she's been chased down and scolded because she looks like she's able-bodied, but it's definitely not the case for her. Let's see, a question about, do you believe that supported and or customized employment opportunities are successful strategies to attempt to destigmatize hiring individuals with disabilities?
Well, I think it's kind of you know, making the best out of what we have, you know, right now to use. I definitely think there's a place for supported employment and, you know, several you know, instances where it's been successful. That's kind of the thing right now, right? And you know, until something else comes along that proves to be more effective or less intrusive into a workforce, you know, I think that's just kind of what we have. But yeah, I am in favor of it though.
Very good. Somebody's asking, and I'm not sure if this is a thing, but could you summarize maybe like the top three complaints that employers have about hiring persons with disabilities, or maybe concerns that they have?
The actually that was a part of the research. We had a question where we asked them what were the greatest challenges, and then we also asked them what were I think the biggest benefits. The common themes that we found for greatest challenges were communication difficulties, perceptions and assumptions made regarding the person with a disability, like assuming, you know, if they can or can do something, and then
Mhm.
whether the person with a disability would be accepted by coworkers, and concerns about whether the person with a disability will be able to keep pace with the job demand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so those were the biggest complaints or challenges is the way we worded it.
Right.
Benefit was an increase in diversity, new perspectives being brought to the job, learning to be patient and compassionate toward a person with a disability, and realizing that people with disabilities can be dedicated hard workers.
hmm Again, it's that kind of finding out what the benefits are, and not everybody knows that. So education is definitely the key to that.
Yeah.
Um,
And each one of those benefits could counter each one of those challenges, right? So again, there
mhm.
you have something to combat the negative views that people have.
Right, and it kind of outweighs it a
Mhm.
lot of the time. Um, I have somebody who made a statement here. I think it would be very beneficial for VR agencies to connect with local chambers of commerce to promote VR programs, offer incentives for hiring persons with disabilities, and companies can share positive experiences to increase awareness about that. Have you seen um, have you seen some agencies working with chambers of commerce to make something like that happen?
I haven't personally, but that's one of the things that we wanted to do long
Oh,
term with that is to maybe if there was like a quarterly meeting or yearly meeting or something, if I could have, you know, a few minutes of their time to present like this type of information to them and, you know, let them
hmm
know what could work instead of focusing on what, you know, what might not work. So I think that's a good opportunity for, you know, your local VR agencies to get in contact with that chamber of commerce and to have some dialogue with them. Yeah, I think it's a really good idea.
um, definitely. I'm just boggled by the number of questions. This is a great topic. Um, let's see here. I have one question: that what is the best way to reroute an employer if they have a preconception about individuals with disabilities? Do you have a powerful statement or any terminology that works better to help counter their concerns?
I don't. I really like quotes, but you know,
hmm
I got about 100 different things running through my mind today. Uh, but I think anytime you can get them to directly tell you what that issue is, it allows you to work on that and get them to see, you know, how probably irrational that thought is, right? So
Right.
if you can get them to change the way that they think, I know you can get them to change the way that they act. So That's the way that I would, approach that hesitation.
Yeah, and it, again, with the education, it's just really hard too to know how much employers already know. I'm just looking, which of these questions do I pick? They're all great. Let's see. What are your thoughts around clients working with a job developer to bridge the gap between client with a disability and the employer? Some clients don't want job developers coaches at the interview, even if they may need support. What are your thoughts on the job developer?
I think it can be beneficial, for folks that are interested in that and want that help. I don't think it's something that should be mandatory for someone to, I don't know, maybe participate in a VR program or something like that. But to anybody that feels like, that would help and kind of give them support and maybe even be more comfortable in an interview setting, like I'm all for it. Like whatever ideas we have that would at least give us a chance to improve these employment numbers. I'm all for it. But again, I think it should still be left up to the client themselves, from an autonomy standpoint.
Sure. Yeah, you definitely have to help them make informed choices, but in the end, it's their choice.
Right.
Let's see. Oh, here's a good statement. As a VR counselor, I've found that the best way to interact with employers is to find out what their needs are first and start building the relationship. When developing a partnership with the employer, there needs to be a mutual benefit, meaning the employer will get a qualified candidate and the candidate obtains employment or a livable wage. And that's something that you discussed before. And it's kind of crossed almost between education about the advantages of working with people with disabilities and also doing a needs assessment with an employer. If a VR counselor goes in prepared, knowing a little bit more about the industry or what opportunities there may be, this sounds like a really a great tip. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
In the research, I believe this is a question related to the research. When the response for the challenges was made, did it include any information on competitive integrated employment to address the concern for not being able to keep pace? I'm not sure if that would have been included in the research.
No,
Um,
no, it wasn't. It would be a good follow up with him. Yeah.
all right. Hey, there you go. It's always nice to have the next place to take the research.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've been in the field of rehabilitation for 20 years. Is there any magic bullet for handling illegal questions in the interview process? Ooh, that's a tricky one.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that there is. You know, there's, the direct way of saying, hey, you can't ask me that.
Right.
But that can always be, you know,
You can be
the
seen as obstinate.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That could be held against you in the interview process.
Right. Right.
It's tough.
Um, I think I've heard of one of the suggestions is just saying, "Are you allowed to ask me that question?"
Mhm. Yeah,
And that way it's a little less accusatory than I'm not going to answer that.
right.
I don't know if it's going to be a magic bullet. I don't know that there possibly can be a magic bullet for that.
But that's
Um,
good. You can always turn that into a statement on your high ethical standards, right? If it seems like they're kind of taken back by the question, right? That could be a good follow up. Yeah.
right. Excellent. Um, we have so many questions. Um, I have a few people talking about windmills changing the perception of ability, being a program that it has multiple modules that can be presented to an employer. And this person is a certified windmills trainer. So that's some great information shared. And then I did have somebody else asking a question about windmills. Perhaps if one of the people with questions would like to get in touch um, with the person who is the trainer. Let me get that name. Edith Jackson Cabell, would you mind if people reach out to you about that windmill training, and would you mind putting your contact information in the chat for folks if you'd like them to get in contact with you about that. I also have Shanada McMillan Shepherd offering windmills training and says it's excellent about working with people with disabilities and it's free. So either of those two folks maybe can put anybody who's interested in touch about that windmills training. Let's see. We do have someone who says, I encourage my clients to disclose on the application questions because of opportunity tax incentive employers receive. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I don't know a lot about the tax incentives that they're able to receive. Um, you know, I'm sure there are folks in the business community that have, thoughts one way or the other about, hey, is that fair or is it unfair? But
Hmm.
um, again, I'm looking at these employment rates and the issues that are connected to employment, poverty, lack of access to, healthcare and those sorts of things. So whatever is going to help improve that, I think it's worth taking a chance and seeing how effective those things can be. And if a tax break is what gets an employer's attention, maybe it's not illegal.
Right. And sometimes, just from my life experience, it seems that if you can appeal to a business person to what their needs are, and that bottom line, if it comes down to money and profit for them, if they can see a way to, if you talk to their wallet a little bit,
Mhm.
then they sometimes are a little bit more receptive to those ideas.
Right.
Um, let's see.
I think for the most part, they want to do the right thing. They want to be helpful.
Hmm.
It can ease their mind about their concern of bringing a person with a disability on, and that's countered by a tax break. Again, I think that'll help the cause.
Right, definitely. Let's see here. Do you have any suggestions? This is kind of probably a newer question that I don't know if it's been explored very much. Communicating with employers regarding a person who uses medical marijuana to manage aspects of their disability. Uh, that's probably kind of tricky because it would depend on states where it's legalized,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah, I would think so. Also, probably the industry that they're in as well. I mean, a factory where some serious accidents can occur that
Sure,
may interfere with their medical policies or that sort of thing. So that's tough.
definitely. Um, Crystal has a question about the research, um, kind of scalability. What would it take to complete a wider study to obtain information needed to move forward in employment for individuals with disabilities? Maybe building on your research with a bigger scope of people. Um, I don't think that anybody could reach everybody in the nation, but do you have plans moving forward to expand some of this research a little bit?
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that could be done is a wider, geographical landscape.
Hmm.
Right. If I'd had the time or the opportunity, that could have, been sent out to several areas, even in, the state of Alabama alone. But now, you're looking at other states that I've, worked in and made a few connections in. Right. So that would be an opportunity to cast a wider net, and then you would get more folks that could participate in this, and then we can look at some of those other issues too, like following up on those challenge questions, right? Like, well, have you tried this, or is this a part of what you're doing too? So, just figuring out a better way for an assessment tool to look at those specific issues, and just casting a wider net, I think would give me some much better results on this.
Yes, and isn't research fun that way?
Yeah, yeah, if it was only that easy.
Right? Um, Mary made a statement in the question and answer. Did you see that documentary movie produced by the Obamas on Netflix, Crip Camp, has been nominated for an Oscar? Um, I think that's just some useful information. Thanks, Mary, for sharing that with the audience.
Mm.
Let's see. What are your thoughts on disability in networks? Do you feel like there's something that they're doing well or that you think should be strengthened? I have not heard of in networks myself. So I really can't speak to that at all. Do you have any ideas?
No, I was going to say I'm out of the loop on that one. Also, I'm not really sure what that is.
Yeah, I have not heard of that at all. Thanks for bringing the question up. If you have any specific details about it, um, if you wanted to put those in the Q&A, that would be great. Let's see here. I have one question. Can you talk about unrealistic expectations of the employer and the person with the disability? Her example is she has a client who's 20 years old and has autism. He really wants to join the military. He's not accepted that this work goal is unrealistic and not feasible. He's in the low average range of IQ. So um, I think that Kelly's asking about the person with the disability. How do you talk to them about positions that may or may not be um, the person may or may not have the capacity for? I think it kind of sounds a little bit like it depends. Again, just well, not exactly like, but sort of like the comment with people using medical marijuana. I think that um, if someone doing that type of job wants to work in a factory where there could be machinery accidents, um, how would you go about talking to somebody who isn't isn't using a medication, um, and maybe just doesn't understand because of an intellectual disability?
Yeah,
Is
even
there
some
any
of
way to
those.
approach that?
Yeah, even some of those old trait and factor approaches, like, going all the way back to, super and that kind of thing. Like, if you can show the person, hey, these are the skills or the things that you have to complete this job. Now let's look at some of the things that you have, your traits and what you're able to do, right? Especially from
Right.
a physical standpoint. I think sometimes if you can like just show someone, how things are a little incompatible, and then have a conversation with them about that, I think that would help. If he has a nice support system that you could kind of bring in and maybe get them to get involved in that discussion too, in a general way. You don't want to, like you said,
Hmm.
just dash somebody's dreams, but maybe just steer them into another direction of things that maybe they can do. Maybe government employment is in the future, or doing some sort of work, civilian work with
Hmm.
folks in the military can be in their future, though.
That makes a lot of sense. One of our previous speakers talked a little bit about getting a job that was um, kind of dream adjacent. So if this person's dream is working in the military, maybe working in a different capacity that is, supports the military or something like that.
Mhm.
I think the person was a sports fan and found work in the sports industry, and was very happy to be able to be close to what their passion is.
Mhm.
So sometimes there are adjacent fields. Let's see here. How can we be sure that government agencies provide reasonable accommodations as stated in ADA? Example, Social Security providing certified interpreters for the deaf. Also, this person has deaf clients that have doctors' offices groups that do not provide certified interpreters and tell patients to bring someone with them. Uh, that kind of sounds a little unethical,
Right. Yeah.
um,
I would think.
maybe illegal.
Yeah, just knowing your rights and maybe looking at who you could complain or report those sorts of issues to, because it definitely doesn't sound, at the very
Hmm.
least, it doesn't sound ethical. Uh,
Right.
yeah.
And you were talking about some of the self advocacy,
Mhm.
self advocacy. Easy for me to say, but maybe that's something that the person could be taught to more strongly advocate for themselves.
Right.
Like you said, we don't want to tell anybody, well, that's illegal. So
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
it seems to back people into a corner. But if there are um, positive advocacy things that people can do for themselves, I think that there's a better chance of getting a positive outcome.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And a lot of that can be tact, right? A lot of times it's not how you say it, not what you say, but how you say it, right? So you
Right.
tactfully say, hey, well, from what I understand, this is what's supposed to be happening. It's kind of an
Hmm.
easier way to approach it.
Um, one of the questions, and I think I'm not sure if if the person is at what they're asking about, but they're talking about, should teachers or counselors develop reasonable employment accommodations such as educational accommodation page in an IEP 504 plan? There's that summary in the IEP summary of performance, but it is confusing. Now, for IEPs, that's for students. I'm not sure. Byron, could you clarify that question? Um, because if I understand correctly, there should be information about reasonable employment accommodations in a person's IPE, but I don't know if that necessarily would be bridged from education into vocational rehabilitation, individual plan for employment. Um, do you know if that's something that schools might be looking at, making sure that VR gets information about what has worked for students that might translate better into the work world?
No, from my experiences in sitting in on IEP meetings, it hasn't been something that's addressed. Unfortunately, the ones that I've been a part of, they're just trying to make sure that the basics are covered, and
Hmm.
that sounds like something that would be going above and beyond, which would be great. Uh,
Right.
but I haven't had that experience in my IEP meetings.
I wonder if that's something that with WIOA, where they've talked about how a certain percentage of federal funding needs to go for transition age youth with disabilities. Um, that might be a program that somebody could look into, making that connection, almost like a bridge program. Um, let's see. We've gotten through actually kind of a lot of these questions. I'm really excited.
Good.
Let's see. I have, what is an effective way to explain gaps in resumes due to disability to an employer? I don't know if that's as much of a thing, gaps in resumes, as it has been in the past. Um, I know that when I was coming up in the career world, that was a super big deal. But I don't know, and especially with COVID, I don't know that that's going to be a problem because everybody, well, not everybody, a large number of people are going to have gaps in their resume um, due to COVID.
Mhm.
Let's see here. I had some folks share their information about the windmill training that's in the question and answer. And wow, a lot of information. Oh, and Patricia has shared some information about illegal questions. Um, let's see. My goodness, you people certainly are curious. I'm going to have to record some of these questions and send them on to Dr. Merkerson because as I look at the time, it is 12:27, and we we are our cutoff time is 12:30 Central Time. Everybody, thanks so much for these questions. This has been
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, this is the most I've ever seen in 2 years of doing webinars. Quite frankly,
Well, I
it's
appreciate
pretty
that.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
But yeah, lots of folks have good contributions and some good questions. Um, I just want to thank you so much for um, doing the webinar with us and doing this question and answer period. It's been a great experience and a lot of really good information for folks. Um, I think that the only announcements I need to make before we go off are just to reiterate what Terry said at the beginning of the webinar, we'll be sending out an email on Thursday for you so that you can get your one your continuing education credit. So keep an eye out in that email, and hopefully you can join SVRI for some of our upcoming webinars. If you want to check out our website, we're at uwstout.edu/SVRI. And I think that's all for today. Again, thanks so much for joining us.
I want to thank you also.
Oh, sure.
It's come together. You're a huge help, and
Oh,
the folks
thanks.
at SBRI, I appreciate all you guys. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent.
everyone
Thanks
for
so much.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. And we'll leave the site open for a couple minutes. There's lots of information that was put in the chat. So in case you're